Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Gretchen, and today I'm going to do another review for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction long list. And today's pick is going to be All That She Carried by Tiya Miles. This is a book that I really did enjoy. It is a book about slavery. It is a book about the power of keepsakes and passing things down from generation to generation. This was a beautiful book. It had a beautiful story to it, and I am very glad that I read it. It's not a book that I had heard of, and when it was longlisted, I was very surprised that this was a book that kind of flew under my radar, because I really tend to enjoy stories about strong women that have survived brutal things and come out on the other side. This book follows this book is kind of tough to explain because it certainly touches on the topic of slavery. We're dealing with the lives of primarily three different women, and we have one whose story starts in around the 1850s, and her name is Rose, and she is an enslaved woman, and I believe she's in Georgia. And Rose has a daughter, and her name is Ashley, and when Ashley is 9 years old, it becomes apparent to Rose that she is going to be sold into slavery, and at the very last minute, she takes the time to grab a few items and put them in a cotton sack and get that sack to Ashley prior to her being sold. And that's kind of the last moment that Rose got to spend with Ashley, and it's the only part of her mother that Ashley was able to carry with her, aside from obviously the memories that she had. And when we start to unpack the point of Rose giving Ashley the bag and the items that were in it, we learn just how much Rose cared about her daughter. For example, although Rose didn't have a lot, she was able to for example, pass on a few handfuls of pecans. And to the reader and the writer of this book, that signifies that Rose was considerate of Ashley having something to eat during that whole process and her journey to get where she was going with her new owner. And that's a very touching thing when you think about what it must be like to lose a child and worry about them and their well-being, and making sure that even though you're no longer there for them, that you are able to still be there and still care for them in some way. So years passed. Ashley, like I said, did get sold into slavery, and years later we have Ashley's granddaughter, whose name is Ruth, and Ruth found the sack that was passed down, and she was able to take her skill of embroidery, and she was able to embroider Rose's story and the items that she was able to get to her grandmother whenever she was sold. And over the years, that sack fell out of the hands of Ruth, and it ended up coming into someone else's possession. And whoever the person was realized what it must have been or what it must have signified. And thankfully, historians were able to get it. She was able to get it to the proper people that were able to preserve it. And from what I understand, I believe it is currently still in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And this was such a heartbreaking story, just knowing what those women went through. And not only that, but the power of that item for it to be passed down from, I mean, at this time, we're talking about 175 years that this cotton sack has survived, and it has, been resurrected and preserved, and it's now in a safe place for the world to learn about the story of the fierceness of Rose as a mother. And as I was reading this story, I kept thinking about how inanimate objects can be tokens of comfort. They can be so much more than an object, and they have sometimes so much more meaning than anyone can even understand. I mean, think about a child with their favorite blanket or their favorite stuffed animal. We grow attached to these things that have no life in them, but we are able to breathe life into them. And I think of the fact that that sack was just an inanimate object, but it held so much power. It held so much significance, and it held the love of her mother. And I think about that for things that we have in our day-to-day lives, things that I have in my life that are very, very meaningful to me. And I could show somebody it, and it would mean absolutely nothing to them, but it would mean the world to me. And how objects become our stories sometimes. When we pass on and we're no longer around, we remain alive in those objects as memories. And this was such a comforting story. Although it was based on horrific events, I found solace in it, knowing that Ashley still had a remnant of her mother with her, even though she was taken into captivity and she was in a horrible place. She still had a symbol of her mother's love with her. And the fact that Ashley's granddaughter ended up with it as well. And it's just, I think it's just it's a common story that I never really took the time to think about. And when I say common story, I mean the passing of item from generation to generation and the power that is held within those items. And it was a really great book that it forced me to think about things and reflect, and I absolutely love it when books are able to do that. And I will say that the writing was also very good. This is definitely a book that I would recommend. I ended up landing on 4.5 stars for this book. I considered giving it 5 stars, but I did find the pacing a little bit difficult. I think that I came off of reading 2 books that I absolutely flew through, and they had my attention the entire time. I was constantly struggling to put the book down. I was so engaged. And the only flaw that me personally having with this book was that I would notice that I would speed through a part or a section and I was like, this is fantastic. And I would then all of a sudden just screech to a halt. And then like the next 10 or 20 and sometimes even 30 pages were slowed down for me. But then all of a sudden it would pick up again and I was off to the races again. And I think that honestly, if my reading experience had been a steady propulsion through the entirety of the story. I definitely could have landed on 5 stars, but for some reason it just seemed like the pacing was a little fragmented for me. And that is me. That is not the book. That is not the author. That is just something that I personally experienced, and any other reader could argue with me and say that I am completely wrong, and that's true. I could absolutely be completely wrong about this, but just based on my personal experience, I did struggle a little with the pacing. So it got a 4.5 stars, which still is not bad. And yeah, I would love to read more from this author if she puts more nonfiction out. It was very well researched, and you could tell that she poured her heart into this book. And I think that that's something that's really important when we're talking about nonfiction. You have books that are very clinical, very sterile, very dry, because they're just trying to give you the facts. This book, the author not only presented us the facts, but she did it with a full heart, and that really shined through the pages. So I definitely recommend this one. I am now 3 books down. I have 13 to go, but so far I am still impressed with what the Women's Prize for Nonfiction is offering. And I think the next book that I'm gonna finish will be Vulture Capitalism, and that will be the next review that I put out. And until we read again, bye.